He hired her to pretend. She wasn't supposed to make it real. Alexander Chen didn't believe in love. He believed in contracts, leverage, and control. At 34, he'd built a tech empire worth $8 billion, and every relationship in his life had been transactional. His board wanted him married, stable, respectable, camera-ready. His late father's will required it for full control of the company. So Alexander did what he always did when faced with an inconvenient problem. He bought a solution. The woman sitting across from him in the empty cafe wasn't what he expected. She was late, 15 minutes late. And when she finally pushed through the door, breathless and apologetic, her hair was damp from the rain, and her coat was 2 seasons old. She carried a worn leather bag that had seen better years, and her eyes, dark, cautious, searching, held something he recognized but couldn't name. Desperation, maybe, or hope. He'd weaponized both before. "Mr. Chen?" Her voice was softer than he anticipated. "I'm so sorry. The bus broke down and I had to sit." He didn't look up from his phone. "You're Emma Reyes, 28, works 2 jobs, medical debt from your mother's cancer treatment, currently 3 months behind on rent." She froze halfway into the chair. He finally met her gaze. "I'm not here to judge your circumstances, Miss Reyes. I'm here to offer you a way out of them." Emma set her bag down slowly, her fingers trembling just enough for him to notice. "The ad said, companion services. I need you to know I'm not interested in that." His tone was clinical, detached. "I need a fiancé, temporary, convincing, public only, 6 months, maybe less. You'll attend events, smile for cameras, play the role. In exchange, I'll pay you $300,000, half up front. If this story touched something in you already, stay until the end, because what starts as a lie becomes the most honest thing either of them has ever felt. And before we dive deeper, like and subscribe if you believe some loves are worth the risk, even when they begin with betrayal." Emma stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. 300,000, yes. He slid a folder across the table. "NDA, contract terms, background on my public persona. You'll need to memorize details about our supposed relationship, how we met, why I fell for you. The story is already written." She didn't touch the folder. "Why me? You're unmemorable." The words came out harsher than he intended, but he didn't correct them. "No social media presence, no complicated past. You need money desperately enough not to ask too many questions, and according to the agency, you're a decent actress. You did community theater in college." That was 6 years ago. Muscle memory. He checked his watch. "I have another meeting in 20 minutes. This offer expires when I leave this table." Emma's hand moved toward the folder, then stopped. "What happens after 6 months?" "We stage a quiet breakup, mutual, amicable. You disappear back into your life, debt-free with enough money to start over. I get what I need from the board. Everyone wins. And if someone finds out it's fake, they won't." His voice dropped to something colder. "Because you'll sign legal documents that ensure your silence for life. Breach of contract would cost you everything I'm offering, plus penalties that would bury you financially for decades." The cafe was almost empty. Rain drummed against the windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, a radio played something in Spanish, soft, melancholy, worlds away from where they sat. Emma opened the folder. Her eyes moved across the pages, but Alexander could tell she wasn't really reading. She was calculating. Weighing her mother's medical bills against her pride, counting the months until eviction, measuring the cost of dignity. He'd seen this look before, on investors, on rivals, on everyone who'd ever sat across from him and realized they had no leverage left. "I need 24 hours to think." "No." He stood, buttoning his coat. "That's not how this works. You decide now, or I find someone else by morning." Emma looked up at him, and for a moment something flickered across her face that he couldn't categorize. Not anger, not fear, something quieter, something that felt like resignation mixed with a courage he didn't understand. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I need one condition added to the contract." He almost smiled. Almost. "You're not in a position to negotiate. Then you're not desperate enough." She closed the folder. "You could have hired a model, an actress. Someone who'd do this for half the price and twice the glamour. But you chose me because I'm forgettable, because nobody will look too close. That means you need this to feel real." Alexander said nothing. He hated that she was right. "My condition," Emma continued, her voice steady now, "is that you never lie to me about why you're really doing this. Not the board story, not the inheritance story, the real reason." "That is the real reason." "No." She stood too, meeting his eyes with an unnerving directness. "That's the logical reason, but people don't spend $300,000 on logic alone. So if I'm going to pretend to love you in public, I need to know what I'm really selling." The cafe suddenly felt smaller, the rain louder. Alexander Chen, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, found himself unsettled by a woman in a second-hand coat who saw through him like glass. "My father," he said finally, the words tasting like ash, "left me a company and a letter. The letter said I'd become exactly what he feared, powerful, empty, and alone. He wanted me to prove him wrong before I could have full control. He wanted me to prove I was still human." Emma's expression softened just slightly. "And you think faking a relationship will prove that?" "I think," Alexander said quietly, "appearances are all that matter in my world. And if I can appear human long enough, maybe the board will stop questioning whether I have a soul." Silence stretched between them. Then Emma picked up the pen from the table. "6 months," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I can do 6 months." She signed her name at the bottom of the contract, neat, careful letters that sealed both their fates. Alexander took the folder back, their fingers brushing for half a second. He felt nothing. She felt everything. "We start Friday," he said. "Charity gala. I'll send a car and address, memorize pages 8 through 12. Our story begins at a hospital fundraiser where you were volunteering. I was there reluctantly. You made me laugh. It's simple enough to be believable." Emma nodded, clutching her bag like a lifeline. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Reyes?" "Yes?" "Don't fall in love with me." His voice was flat, emotionless. "People who love me tend to regret it." The door closed behind him. The bell chimed softly. Emma stood alone in the cafe, rain-soaked and trembling, holding a contract that promised salvation. She didn't know yet that she'd just agreed to the most dangerous role of her life, and neither did he. The dress arrived in a box that cost more than Emma's rent. She opened it alone in her cramped studio apartment, the tissue paper whispering like secrets as she lifted out midnight blue silk that caught the light like water. No price tag, no return label, Just a card in sharp minimalist font. Friday, 7 p.m., don't be late. AC Emma held it up to the mirror and barely recognized the reflection staring back. The girl from community theater. The woman who served coffee at dawn and cleaned office buildings at dusk. Now wrapped in fabric that felt like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Her phone buzzed. A calendar invite. Alexander Chen. Final briefing. Thursday, 6 p.m. His office. She had one day to become someone else. Alexander's office occupied the entire top floor of the Chen Technologies Tower, all glass and steel, and city lights that made the world below look like a circuit board. Emma stepped off the private elevator into silence, so complete it felt intentional, controlled, like everything else about him. He stood at the window with his back to her, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in Mandarin. Crisp. Cutting. The conversation ended abruptly, and he turned. "You're early." He said it like an accusation. "You said don't be late." Emma's voice came out smaller than she intended. The space swallowed sound. "I thought early was safe." Early suggests eagerness. Eagerness suggests you need this. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit. We need to establish parameters." She sat. He remained standing. A power play so obvious it would have been funny if her hands weren't shaking. Alexander placed a tablet in front of her. Photos scrolled across the screen. Him at galas. Him with politicians. Him shaking hands with people whose faces she'd seen on magazine covers. "This is my world," he said. "Everyone there will be assessing you. Your dress, your posture, how you hold a wine glass, whether you know which fork to use. They'll smell desperation like blood in water. Then maybe you should have hired someone from your world." His eyes flicked to hers, sharp, evaluating. "Someone from my world would have an agenda. You just have debt." The cruelty was casual, surgical. Emma felt it land but refused to flinch. "Tell me about your family," he continued, pulling up a document. "I need to know what you might say if asked." "My mother died 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. My father left when I was 7. No siblings, no husband, no boyfriend." She recited it like a grocery list. Easier that way. "Anything else you need to weaponize?" Something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt, more like recognition. "Your mother," he said slowly. "In the hospital, were you there when she—" "Every day." Emma's throat tightened. "Every single day until the end, even when the bills piled up, even when the nurses told me to go home and rest. I was there." Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he closed the tablet. "My mother died when I was 12, he said, his voice stripped of its usual armor. "Heart attack, sudden. My father was in Beijing closing a deal. He didn't make it back in time. I was alone with her in the hospital for 6 hours before anyone came." The confession hung between them like a thread. Neither knew whether to pull or leave untouched. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "Don't be." The wall snapped back up instantly. "I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing it so you understand. Grief is a currency in my world. People will use yours to make you relatable, to make us relatable. The orphaned billionaire and the girl who nursed her dying mother. It's a narrative they'll love." Emma stood abruptly. "Is everything a transaction to you?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Everything. Even this." She gestured between them. "Even a conversation about dead mothers?" "Especially that." He moved closer, not threatening but deliberate. "You signed a contract to perform, Miss Reyes. That performance starts now. If you can't separate emotion from strategy, you'll break before the first champagne toast." They stood 3 feet apart, close enough for her to notice things she hadn't before: the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the exhaustion carved beneath his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he tried to stay detached. "You're good at this," Emma said quietly, "pretending nothing touches you. I'm excellent at it, but you're pretending." She took 1 step closer. "That's the difference between us. I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. You're pretending to be nothing at all." Alexander's expression didn't change, but his breathing did. Just slightly, just enough. "Tomorrow night," he said, voice low and controlled. "You'll arrive at 7:30. My driver will brief you in the car. We'll enter together. I'll introduce you as my fiancé. You'll smile. You'll be warm but not effusive, charming but not desperate. You'll touch my arm occasionally, left arm, never right. You'll laugh at exactly 2 of my jokes. You'll excuse yourself after 40 minutes to powder your nose, giving me time to handle business conversations alone. Understood? Left arm, 2 laughs, 40 minutes. Emma's voice was steady now. "Anything else? Should I practice breathing on cue?" The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. "You have a smart mouth for someone who needs me. And you have a cold heart for someone who needs to appear human." The air between them shifted, charged, not quite hostility. Not quite attraction, something combustible that neither of them wanted to name. Alexander turned away first. "The car will collect you at 6:45. Don't eat beforehand. The food at these events is deliberately terrible, but you'll need to pretend it's excellent. And Emma?" She paused at the elevator. "Wear your hair down. The controlled look works for boardrooms. I need you softer for this." The elevator doors closed on her reflection, wide-eyed, uncertain, caught between 2 versions of herself. Friday arrived like an execution date. Emma stood in her apartment, the blue dress clinging to a body she'd barely fed all week, trying to remember how to breathe like someone who belonged in a world of crystal and silk. Her reflection looked like a stranger, beautiful, terrified, bought. The car was black, silent, and smelled like leather and expensive cologne. The driver said nothing. The city blurred past, her world disappearing behind tinted glass. At 7:29 they pulled up to a building wrapped in light and elegance, a red carpet, photographers, people in clothes that cost more than her yearly salary. The door opened. Alexander stood there in a tuxedo that looked like it was designed specifically to destroy her composure. He extended his hand. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she thought. "Yes," she said. His hand was warm, solid. He pulled her close, close enough for cameras, close enough for his mouth to brush her ear as he whispered, "Remember, you love me. Make them believe it." The cameras erupted in light. Emma smiled, and Alexander Chen felt something he'd spent 15 years killing, the faint, terrifying flutter of his carefully controlled heart, recognizing hers. But neither of them was ready for what happened when pretending started to feel like the only honest thing they'd ever done. The gala was a performance, and Emma played her part flawlessly. She laughed at his jokes exactly 2 as instructed. She touched his left arm with a tenderness that looked effortless. She made small talk with board members' wives who sized her up like livestock, their smiles sharp and assessing. And when Alexander introduced her as the woman who reminded me what matters, she blushed on cue, her hand finding his with an intimacy that made photographers lean in closer. By the time they left at midnight, Emma's face hurt from smiling. In the car, the silence was deafening. Alexander loosened his bow tie, staring out at the city sliding past. Emma kicked off the heels that had carved blisters into her feet. "You did well," he said finally, not looking at her. "Better than expected. Is that a compliment or an audit?" "Both." He turned then, studying her in the dim light. "Margaret Sutton asked about our wedding plans. What did you tell her? That we're keeping it intimate? That you proposed during a rainstorm because you couldn't wait for perfect timing?" Emma's voice was flat with exhaustion. "That you're teaching me patience, and I'm teaching you spontaneity." She cried, actually cried. "Good." He nodded. "She controls 3 board votes. If she believes the story, others will follow." Emma turned to face him fully. "Do you ever stop calculating?" "No." Simple. Honest. "Do you ever stop judging me for it?" "I'm not judging you. I'm trying to understand you." "Don't." The word came out harder than he intended. Understanding wasn't part of the contract. The car pulled up to her building, grimy, tired, worlds away from where they'd just been. Alexander stared up at the cracked facade like he'd discovered a foreign country. "This is where you live?" "Not everyone has a penthouse, Mr. Chen." Emma reached for the door handle. "Some of us live in the real world." "Wait." His hand caught her wrist, not rough but firm. "Tomorrow, I need you at another event. Brunch, casual. My colleagues want to meet you in a less formal setting." "Tomorrow's Saturday. I work both jobs on Saturday." "Not anymore." He pulled out his phone. "I'm paying you $300,000. That buys me 6 months of your time. Quit the jobs." Emma jerked her hand back. "Those jobs keep me alive until your money clears." "The first half cleared 2 days ago." His tone suggested this should be obvious. "Check your account." She stared at him, then grabbed her phone with shaking fingers, opened her banking app, and saw a number that made the world tilt sideways. $150,000. "You..." Her voice cracked. "You didn't tell me." "You didn't ask." He was already typing something. "Quit the jobs tonight. Tomorrow. Brunch at 11. The car will..." "No." Alexander looked up slowly. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Emma's exhaustion transformed into something sharper. "You can buy my time at events. You can dress me up and parade me around your world. But you don't get to tell me how to live the rest of my life. Those jobs, they're mine. They're real. And I'm not giving them up just because you find them inconvenient." "That's irrational. You're financially stable now. Why would you..." "Because they matter to me." The words exploded out of her. "Because Maria at the diner remembers how I take my coffee. Because Mr. Patterson at the office building shows me pictures of his grandkids. Because when my mother was dying, those people covered my shifts and slipped money into my bag when they thought I wasn't looking. That's not something you can buy, Mr. Chen. That's called being human." The silence in the car was absolute. Alexander's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "Fine, keep your jobs. But tomorrow, 11 a.m., non-negotiable." Emma climbed out of the car, then leaned back in, her voice softer now. "You know what Margaret Sutton really asked me tonight?" "What?" "She asked if you've changed since meeting me, if I've seen the boy underneath the businessman." Emma's eyes held his. "I told her yes. I lied. But maybe you should ask yourself why everyone in your life is waiting for you to become someone different." The door closed. The car pulled away. Alexander sat in the darkness, her words echoing like an indictment. The next morning, Emma woke to 17 missed calls. Not from Alexander. From the hospital where her mother had died. She called back with ice in her veins, already calculating which bills had caught up to her, which payment plan had collapsed. "Miss Reyes?" The administrator's voice was confused. "We're calling about your mother's account. The outstanding balance was paid in full this morning. We wanted to confirm the payment source." Emma's apartment tilted. How much was paid? $47,812. The payment came from Chen Technologies with a note that it was a gift. We wanted to ensure this wasn't fraudulent. She hung up, grabbed her jacket, and took 3 buses to reach the Chen Technologies tower before her rage could cool into something manageable. The receptionist tried to stop her. Security moved to intercept. But Emma's fury had velocity, and she was through the elevator and onto the top floor before anyone could coordinate a response. Alexander was in a meeting. Glass walls, 6 board members, spreadsheets projected on screens. Emma walked right in. "How dare you?" Her voice cut through the presentation like a blade. "How dare you?" The board members froze. Alexander's face remained impassive, but his eyes flashed with something that might have been warning. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "give us the room." They filed out in uncomfortable silence. The door clicked shut. "You paid my mother's medical debt," Emma said, her voice shaking, "without asking. Without telling me. It was practical. The debt was causing you stress. Stress affects performance. I solved a problem." His tone was clinical, detached. "You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" She stepped closer, fury and something dangerously close to tears burning in her throat. "That debt was mine, my responsibility, my connection to her, and you just erased it like it was nothing?" "It was nothing. $47,000 is what I spend on a watch." The slap came before she could stop herself. Her palm connected with his cheek, sharp, sudden, echoing in the cavernous office. Alexander's head snapped to the side. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned back to face her. His cheek was red. His eyes were dark. But he didn't move, didn't retaliate. Just stood there, absorbing her anger like he'd been waiting for it. "That debt," Emma whispered, tears streaming now, "was the last thing I had that proved she existed. Every payment I made was a promise that I wouldn't forget her, that her suffering meant something, and you took that from me." Alexander's expression cracked, just for a moment, just enough for her to see the boy who'd sat alone with his dying mother for 6 hours, waiting for someone to care. "I didn't..." His voice was rough, uncertain. "I thought I was helping." "You can't help by erasing people's pain, Alexander. You can only help by sitting with them while they feel it." The silence stretched like a chasm. Then quietly, "Show me." Emma wiped her eyes. "What?" "Your world." He looked away, jaw tight. "You said those jobs matter, that those people matter. Show me why." "Why would you want..." "Because," he interrupted, and for the first time since she'd met him, his voice carried something that sounded like honesty. "Everyone keeps telling me I've forgotten how to be human. Maybe it's time I remember." That afternoon, Emma took Alexander Chen to the diner where she worked mornings. He stood outside looking at the chipped paint and flickering neon sign like she'd brought him to a crime scene. "This is where you work?" "Was. I called in my 2 weeks this morning." She pushed through the door. But Maria's still here, and she makes the best café con leche you'll ever taste. The diner smelled like grease and coffee and burnt toast, the scent of 1,000 ordinary mornings. Maria looked up from behind the counter, her weathered face breaking into a smile that could warm concrete. Mija! She came around, pulling Emma into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and home. Then she noticed Alexander, still standing awkwardly in the doorway in his $1,000 suit. "And who's this? You finally bringing a boy to meet me?" Emma hesitated. The lie sat on her tongue, ready and rehearsed. But Alexander spoke first. "I'm Alexander. Emma's..." "I'm trying to be someone she doesn't regret knowing." Maria studied him with the sharp eyes of someone who'd raised 5 kids and buried 2 husbands. Then she smiled. "Well, that's honest, at least. Sit, both of you. You look hungry." They sat in a cracked vinyl booth. Maria brought coffee without being asked. Black for Alexander, 1 sugar and cream for Emma, exactly how she'd taken it for 3 years. Alexander wrapped his hands around the mug like he'd never held something so simple. He took a sip, blinked. "This is terrible," Emma offered. "Perfect." He said it like a confession. "This is perfect." Maria came back with pancakes neither of them had ordered. She set them down with a knowing smile. "On the house, for Emma's boy." As she walked away, Alexander looked at the stack of pancakes like they were a puzzle to solve. "When was the last time someone just gave you something?" Emma asked softly. "Without wanting anything back?" He thought for a long moment. "I honestly can't remember." They ate in comfortable silence. Outside, the city moved past, buses and taxis and people living lives that had nothing to do with board meetings or stock prices, real lives, messy lives, human lives. "Thank you," Alexander said finally, "for bringing me here." "You're welcome." Emma pushed her plate aside. "But Alexander, next time you want to help, ask first. My pain isn't a problem for you to solve. It's a part of my story." He met her eyes, nodded. "I'll remember that." And for the first time since this dangerous charade began, Emma saw something in him that terrified her more than his coldness ever had. She saw the possibility that he might actually change, and that was the moment she realized the most dangerous lie wasn't the one she was telling the world. It was the one she was starting to tell herself. 3 months into the lie, Emma forgot it was one. It happened in small moments that accumulated like interest. The way Alexander started texting her in the mornings, not instructions but observations. "The sky looks like your dress from the gala." The way he'd begun showing up at the diner on Tuesday afternoons, sitting in the same booth, working on his laptop while she served other customers. The way his hand would find the small of her back at events, not for cameras, but because it seemed to belong there. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. They'd fallen into a rhythm. Public events twice a week, private dinners every Thursday at restaurants where he taught her about wine and she taught him about laughing at himself. Stolen afternoons where she'd drag him to street markets and he'd pretend to be annoyed while buying her flowers from vendors who called her Mija and him El Novio Guapo. The contract had said 6 months. They were halfway through, and Emma had stopped counting days until freedom. She'd started dreading the countdown instead. It was a Wednesday when everything collapsed. Emma was at Alexander's penthouse. She'd been staying over more frequently, sleeping in the guest room, but spending evenings curled on his ridiculous white sofa, arguing about movies and politics, and whether his building's doorman actually liked him or just his tips. "He likes me," Alexander insisted, pouring wine with the casual confidence of someone who'd stopped measuring everything. "We talk about his daughter. She's applying to colleges." "You paid for her application fees, didn't you?" Emma accused, smiling. "That's privileged information." But his ears went slightly red, a tell she'd learned to recognize. "And maybe I mentioned her essay to an admissions contact, purely as a character reference." "You're getting soft, Mr. Chen." "I'm getting strategic, Miss Reyes." He handed her a glass, their fingers brushing. The touch lingered longer than necessary. A happy doorman is a loyal doorman. Keep telling yourself that. She took a sip, watching him over the rim. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves. There was a pencil behind his ear that he'd forgotten about. He looked almost relaxed. "Alexander?" "When this is over," the words caught in her throat. "After the 6 months, what happens to us?" His expression shuttered slightly. Not closed, but careful. "What do you want to happen?" "I asked first." "Emma." He set down his glass, turning to face her fully. "This arrangement has been unexpectedly tolerable." "Tolerable." She laughed, but it came out fragile. "High praise." "That's not what I meant." He moved closer, and suddenly the enormous penthouse felt as small as the diner booth. "I meant that you've made me remember things I'd deliberately forgotten. How to be present. How to care about someone beyond what they can provide. How to—" His phone buzzed. Then again. Then erupted into a cascade of notifications that shattered the moment like dropped glass. Alexander grabbed it, frowning. His face went pale, then red, then something beyond anger, something that looked like betrayal carved into stone. "Alexander?" Emma stood, alarm rising. "What's wrong?" He turned the phone toward her. The headline blazed across the screen. "Tech billionaire's fake romance exposed." Chen's fiancée was hired through escort agency below it. Photos. The cafe where they'd signed the contract. Bank records showing the $150,000 transfer. Screenshots of the NDA. An interview with someone from the companion services agency, carefully worded to imply exactly what Alexander had assured her it wasn't. And worse, text messages between Alexander and his attorney, discussing the arrangement, referring to Emma as the candidate, clinical, transactional. Every cold word he'd ever used to describe what she was to him, immortalized in black and white. Emma's world tilted. How did they get those messages, those records? His voice was lava. "Someone leaked them. Someone with access to my private communications, someone I trusted." "Alexander, I didn't what?" He spun on her, and suddenly he was the man from the cafe again, cold, controlled, lethal. "Didn't sell our story for what I'm sure was a generous payout? Didn't decide 300,000 wasn't enough?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. "You think I did this? Who else had access to the details? Who else knew about the contract, the payments, the exact cafe where we met?" His hands were shaking, the first time she'd ever seen him lose control. "Jesus, Emma, I actually started to believe—" He cut himself off, jaw clenched. "It doesn't matter what I believed. It matters to me." Her voice broke. "You think I would destroy myself like this? My name is in those articles. My face is everywhere. My mother's medical debt is now public information. Why would I? Money, 15 minutes of fame, revenge for every time I treated you like a transaction instead of a person." He turned away, staring at the city that was probably already reading the headlines. Pick a motive. They all make more sense than the alternative. What alternative? That I was fool enough to think this was becoming real. The silence was deafening. Emma's eyes burned. You want to know what I think, Alexander? I think you're looking for a reason to push me away. Because the last 3 months have terrified you. Because you started feeling something you couldn't control, and that's the one thing your money can't buy or your intelligence can't solve. Don't! His voice was a warning. Don't psychoanalyze me. Then don't accuse me of betraying you when you've been waiting for me to do exactly that since the day we met. She grabbed her bag, hands shaking. You want a villain? Fine, I'll be your villain. It's easier than being the woman who was stupid enough to fall in love with someone who paid her not to. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Alexander turned slowly. What did you say? Nothing. Emma's voice cracked. I said nothing, because that's what I am to you, right? Nothing but a contract and a performance. She walked to the door. Her vision blurred with tears. She refused to let fall until she was alone. Emma, wait. The deal's off. She didn't turn around, couldn't. Consider the contract breached. I'll return the money, every cent. Just leave me alone. The elevator doors closed on her breaking heart. Alexander stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury and silence, his phone still buzzing with the aftermath of an explosion he couldn't contain. On the screen, a new notification appeared, an email from an unknown sender. Enjoy the show. You took everything from me once. Now I'm taking everything from you. M.S. Martin Sutherland, his former protege, the man Alexander had fired 2 years ago for ethics violations, the man who'd sworn revenge. Alexander's knees buckled. He sank onto the sofa where Emma had been sitting moments ago, her wine glass still half full, and felt the full weight of what he'd done. She hadn't betrayed him. He'd betrayed her. The next 72 hours were a blur of headlines and lawyers and board members demanding his resignation. Alexander handled it mechanically. Press releases, damage control, strategic interviews where he painted himself as the victim of a disgruntled ex-employee. He never mentioned Emma's name, never tried to contact her, just methodically dismantled Martin Sutherland's life the way he dismantled all his enemies, with precision and no mercy. But at night, alone in the penthouse that suddenly felt like a mausoleum, he couldn't stop replaying that final conversation. I'll be your villain. It's easier than being the woman who was stupid enough to fall in love with someone who paid her not to. She'd loved him. Emma Reyes, who worked 2 jobs and remembered how people took their coffee and taught him that pancakes at a diner could taste like home. She'd loved him. And he'd accused her of betrayal without hesitation, without trust, without giving her even a moment's benefit of doubt, because that's what he did, what he'd always done. He calculated worst-case scenarios and protected himself preemptively. He built walls so high that nothing could reach him, not even love. His phone sat on the table, dark and silent. Her number was still there. 1 call, 1 text, 1 apology. But Alexander had spent 15 years learning how to be invulnerable. He'd never learned how to say he was sorry. Emma returned to her life like a ghost, returning to a grave. The diner welcomed her back. Maria asked no questions, just poured her coffee and squeezed her shoulder. The office building where she cleaned took her back on night shifts. She paid back the $150,000 in installments, working herself to exhaustion, refusing to keep a single dollar that came from him. The media moved on to other scandals, other headlines, other people's pain. But Emma carried hers like a stone in her chest. She'd known it was a lie, known from the beginning. But somewhere between the galas and the wine, and the way he'd looked at her in the diner, like she was teaching him a language he'd forgotten, she'd let herself believe the impossible. That Alexander Chen, who measured everything in profit and loss, might calculate her worth as infinite. She'd been wrong. Late one night, 3 weeks after everything fell apart, Emma was cleaning the executive floor of Chen Technologies. The building was empty, silent. Her keys jingled as she moved from office to office, emptying trash bins and wiping down desks. She paused outside his office. The door was unlocked. The lights were off. But in the darkness, she could see his silhouette against the window, standing exactly where he'd stood the night she'd slapped him, motionless, alone. Emma's hand hovered over the door handle. Then she turned away. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. She didn't see him watch her leave through the reflection in the glass, didn't see the way his hand pressed against the window like he could reach through space and time to undo everything, didn't see him break. Because the cruelest lie wasn't the one they told the world. It was the one they'd told themselves, that love could survive in a foundation built on deception. 6 weeks of silence felt like 6 years. Alexander threw himself into work with the ferocity of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. 18-hour days, back-to-back meetings, acquisitions and mergers and strategies that required every ounce of his intellect and none of his heart. The board was satisfied. The scandal had been contained. Martin Sutherland was facing criminal charges for corporate espionage. Everything was back to normal. Except Alexander couldn't remember what normal felt like anymore. He'd stopped going to the diner, stopped ordering coffee that tasted like home. His penthouse felt like a museum, beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of life. At night, he'd stand at the window where Emma had once curled up with wine and laughter, and wonder when he'd become a man who lived in a place that had never been a home. His assistant noticed first. "Mr. Chen?" Sarah's voice was careful. "You have the Nakamura meeting in 10 minutes, but you've been staring at that document for 20 minutes without reading it." Alexander blinked. The words on the page were meaningless. "Reschedule." "Sir, this is the 3rd time. I said reschedule." His voice was flat, empty. "And Sarah, clear my calendar for tomorrow." She hesitated. "The entire day?" "Yes." For the first time in 15 years, Alexander Chen had nowhere to be and no idea who he was without the armor of productivity. He found himself at the diner on a Tuesday afternoon. Maria looked up from the counter, her expression shifting from surprise to something that looked like pity. "She doesn't work Tuesdays anymore," Maria said before he could ask. "Switched to nights only. Said she needed to avoid complications." Alexander sat in their booth anyway. The vinyl was still cracked. The coffee still smelled the same. But everything felt wrong without her there to make it make sense. "You broke her heart," Maria said, setting down a cup he hadn't ordered. "I've known that girl since she was 23 years old. Watched her survive things that would have destroyed most people. But you?" She shook her head. "You're the only one who ever made her believe she deserved something beautiful. And then you took it away." "I didn't," Alexander's voice cracked. "I thought she'd betrayed me." "Did she?" "No." "Then why are you sitting here instead of on your knees begging her forgiveness?" The question landed like a punch. Alexander stared into his coffee, black, bitter, nothing like how Emma took hers. "Because I don't know how to be the man she deserves. I don't know how to love someone without calculating the cost. I don't know how to trust without contracts and guarantees." Maria sat down across from him, an intimacy she'd never offered before. "Mijo, love isn't something you calculate. It's something you risk. Emma risked everything for you, her pride, her heart, her truth, and you couldn't risk even one moment of vulnerability. What if I'm too broken to change? Then you stay broken." Maria's voice was firm but not unkind. "But Emma, she doesn't deserve to carry your fear anymore. So either you figure out how to be brave, or you let her go completely. Stop haunting her life like a ghost." Alexander left 20 minutes later, Maria's words echoing louder than any board meeting ever had. That night, he did something he hadn't done in years. He went to therapy. Dr. Patel listened without judgment as Alexander unraveled 15 years of carefully constructed defenses, talked about his mother's death and his father's coldness and the empire he'd built to prove he didn't need anyone. Talked about Emma, the way she'd seen through him, the way she'd made him laugh, the way she'd loved him despite every reason not to. "You paid her to perform a role," Dr. Patel said gently, "but somewhere along the way, you both stopped performing. That's what terrifies you, not that she lied, that she didn't." "I destroyed her," Alexander whispered. "I accused her of the one thing she'd never do, and I can't take it back." "No, you can't take it back." Dr. Patel leaned forward. "But you can acknowledge it. You can change. You can become someone who deserves a second chance, not from her, but from yourself. What if she doesn't forgive me? Then you live with that." But Alexander, living with regret while trying to be better is still more honest than living perfectly while being empty. 2 months after the fall, Alexander started making changes. Small ones at first. He learned his doorman's daughter's name, Keisha, pre-med at Columbia. He started saying thank you to his driver and asking about his family. He donated anonymously to the hospital where Emma's mother had died, funding a program for families drowning in medical debt. He went back to the diner every Tuesday, never on nights when Emma worked. Just sat in the booth, drank terrible coffee, and left generous tips that Maria pretended not to notice. He kept Emma's wine glass, the one she'd left half full that last night. Kept it on his bookshelf like a relic of who he wanted to become. And slowly, painfully, Alexander Chen learned what it meant to be human without expecting anything in return. It was a Friday evening, 3 months after everything shattered, when he finally saw her again. Not at the diner, not at his building, but at the hospital where her mother had died, the one he'd been funding anonymously. He was there for a board meeting about the new program. She was there visiting the children's ward, reading stories to kids with IV lines and brave smiles. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching her bring light to a room full of darkness. She wore scrubs someone had lent her. Her hair was pulled back. She looked tired, beautiful, alive in a way his world had never been. One of the kids noticed him first. "Mister, are you lost?" Emma's head turned. Their eyes met. The book slipped from her hands. Alexander couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Could only stand there, stripped of every defense, letting her see exactly how thoroughly she'd destroyed and rebuilt him. "I'll be right back," Emma told the children, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She walked past him into the hallway. He followed like a man walking toward either salvation or execution. They stood in the fluorescent brightness, surrounded by the hum of machines and distant conversations. "The program," Emma said finally. "The medical debt fund. That was you." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you were right." His voice was raw. About everything, about me, about what matters, about the fact that I'd forgotten how to be human. He took a breath that felt like drowning. I don't expect forgiveness, Emma. I don't expect anything. I just need you to know you weren't the one who betrayed us. I was, and I'm sorry. I'm so desperately sorry. Emma's eyes glistened. You hurt me, Alexander. I know. You made me believe I was worth something, and then you threw it away the moment it became inconvenient. I know. He wanted to reach for her, but kept his hands at his sides. I spent 15 years building walls. You were the first person who made me want to tear them down. And when the scandal hit, I chose the walls, I chose fear, I chose everything except you. Why should I believe you're different now? Because I'm not asking you to. Alexander's voice broke. I'm not here to win you back or make promises I don't know if I can keep. I'm here because you deserved an apology 3 months ago, and I was too broken to give it to you. I'm here because even if you never speak to me again, you should know, loving you was the most honest thing I've ever done. And losing you taught me that some things can't be bought or controlled or solved. Some things you just have to feel. Tears streamed down Emma's face. I can't do this again, Alexander. I can't be your lesson or your redemption arc. I can't fix you. I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm asking... He stopped, realizing the truth. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you that you changed me. And whether or not I ever see you again, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you tried to give me. The silence stretched like a bridge. Neither knew how to cross. Then Emma spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I need time. Of course. And space. Anything. And Alexander. She looked at him with eyes that held both devastation and the faintest spark of something that might, someday, become hope. If you're serious about changing, do it for yourself. Not for me, not for us, for you. He nodded, throat too tight for words. Emma walked back into the children's ward, back to the light and laughter and the life she'd built from the wreckage. Alexander stood alone in the hallway and felt something he'd spent his entire adult life avoiding. He felt everything, and for the first time he didn't try to make it stop. 4 months passed in careful silence. Alexander kept his distance, but Emma felt his presence in the margins of her life. The hospital's medical debt program expanded, anonymous funding that helped 3 more families avoid the nightmare she'd lived through. The diner received a grant to renovate, no strings attached. Maria's granddaughter got a scholarship to art school from a foundation Emma had never heard of. She knew it was him, knew he was trying to speak in the only language he was learning, quiet generosity without expectation. But Emma had meant what she said. She needed time, needed to rebuild herself without the weight of his transformation resting on her shoulders. She worked, she healed. She started painting again, something she'd abandoned years ago when survival took precedence over beauty. Her tiny apartment filled with canvases of rain and city lights and a man's silhouette against windows that looked like loneliness. She didn't call him, didn't seek him out, but she thought about him in the quiet moments, wondered if people could really change, or if they just learned to hide their sharp edges better. It was a cold January evening when Emma's world shifted again. She was leaving the hospital after volunteering when she saw him in the parking lot, not by coincidence but clearly waiting. He looked different, thinner. His suit was rumpled. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard-won revelations. I'm not here to pressure you, Alexander said before she could speak. I'm here because there's something you need to know. Emma's heart hammered. What? The Chen Technologies board voted yesterday. They're removing the marriage requirement from my father's will conditions. His voice was steady but raw. I fought for it, argued that his test was about humanity, not a wedding ring. They agreed. That's good. That's what you wanted. No. He stepped closer, snowflakes catching in his hair. What I wanted was to prove I was still human. But I went about it the wrong way. I tried to fake it, to manufacture proof, and all it did was show me how far I'd fallen. Emma wrapped her arms around herself. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know that nothing I'm about to say has anything to do with contracts or boards or inheritances. He pulled an envelope from his coat. This is a check for $300,000, the full amount I promised you. You returned half, but you earned all of it. You fulfilled the contract completely. She stared at the envelope like it might bite. I don't want it. I know, but it's yours. What you do with it, keep it, burn it, donate it, that's your choice. He set it on the hood of her car. I'm not trying to buy anything, Emma. I'm trying to honor a debt. We're even then. Her voice was cold, protective. You can move on. I don't want to move on. The confession came out broken. I want to move forward, differently, better. And I need you to know that whether or not you're part of my life, you've already changed it permanently. Alexander, let me finish, please. He took a shaking breath. I've spent 4 months learning how to be a person instead of a machine. I go to therapy twice a week. I volunteer at a youth center teaching kids about technology and business, not because it looks good, but because one of them reminds me of myself at 12 and maybe I can keep him from becoming me at 34. Emma's eyes widened. You're volunteering. Badly. The kids think I'm awkward. They're right. A ghost of a smile. But I show up every Wednesday. And last week, one of them asked if I was okay because I looked sad. A 13-year-old noticed I had feelings. That's how far I'd fallen. Children were shocked I could experience emotions. Despite herself, Emma's lips twitched. I'm learning, Emma. Slowly, painfully. I'm learning that relationships aren't transactions. That trust isn't a contract clause. That love... His voice cracked. That love is the only thing worth risking everything for, even when you're terrified of losing. What are you saying? Alexander met her eyes with devastating honesty. I'm saying that I fell in love with you, really. Not the performance version, not the convenient version, the terrifying, uncontrollable, changes everything version. And I destroyed it because I was too afraid to believe it was real. The parking lot was empty except for them and the falling snow and the weight of 4 months of silence finally breaking. I fell in love with you too, Emma whispered. You know that. I told you that night. I know, and I didn't say it back. I didn't say anything except accusations and fear. He took one careful step closer. But I'm saying it now. I love you, Emma Reyes. I love the way you see people, the way you made me remember that empathy isn't weakness, the way you never let me hide behind money or power. I love you, and I don't expect you to love me back anymore. I just needed you to know that what we had, what I destroyed, was the realest thing in my entire constructed life. Tears froze on Emma's cheeks. You hurt me so badly, Alexander. I know. I don't know if I can trust you again. I know that too. His hands stayed at his sides, even though she could see them trembling. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that you were right about me. I was pretending to be nothing. But you made me want to be something. And even if I never get to be something with you, I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful you showed me the difference." The snow fell heavier now, muffling the city sounds, creating a pocket of silence around them. Emma looked at the man who'd hired her to fake a love story and accidentally made it real. Looked at the exhaustion in his eyes and the vulnerability in his posture and the careful distance he maintained, respecting her boundaries even while breaking his own heart open. "I need more time," she said finally. "I need to know this isn't just guilt or loneliness. I need to know you're doing this for yourself, not for me. I understand. But Alexander?" She picked up the envelope, walked to him, and pressed it back into his hands. "Take this check and donate it to the hospital's program. In your mother's name, not anonymously, publicly. Let people see you care." He looked at the envelope, then at her. "Why?" "Because the Alexander Chen I fell in love with was the one who showed up at a diner and learned how to be present. The one who sat with sick kids and felt their pain. The one who was brave enough to be vulnerable." Her voice softened. "Keep being that man. Not for me. For you. And then maybe we'll talk." Hope flickered across his face. Fragile, uncertain, but real. "Maybe. Maybe." She smiled through her tears. "I'm not making promises, but I'm not closing the door either." "That's more than I deserve." "No," Emma said gently. "It's exactly what you need to earn." She walked to her car, leaving him standing in the snow with a check and a chance, and the understanding that love wasn't something you could buy or control. It was something you had to become worthy of, one choice at a time. Alexander watched her taillights disappear, then looked down at the envelope. The next morning, Chen Technologies announced a $10 million donation to the hospital's medical debt program, established in memory of Melissa Chen, with Alexander's face and story attached. No longer hiding behind anonymity, but standing publicly in his grief and his hope. And for the first time in his calculated life, Alexander Chen did something without knowing the outcome. He trusted that becoming better was enough, even if it meant being better alone. 6 months later, spring came to the city like a promise kept. Gentle rain washing away winter's grey, cherry blossoms defying concrete with impossible color, the world remembering how to be soft again. Emma stood at her apartment window, coffee steam curling between her fingers, watching the sunrise paint the skyline gold. Her life had found a rhythm again. The hospital volunteer work had turned into a part-time coordinator position. Her paintings were in a small gallery downtown, nothing fancy but hers, real, honest. She'd kept the door cracked open, like she'd promised, and Alexander had respected the distance, like he'd learned to do. But she felt him still. In the program updates that crossed her desk, in the occasional text, never asking for anything, just sharing small moments, taught a kid Python today. He called me Mr. Robot, but I think he meant it affectionately. Or, Maria says the new ovens are perfect. She also says I still can't cook. Some things don't change. He was changing, though. She could see it in the interviews he gave about the medical debt initiative. The way he spoke about his mother now, not as a ghost but as a memory he'd learned to honor. The photo that appeared in a business magazine of him at the youth center, laughing with teenagers who clearly thought he was awkward but showed up anyway. He was becoming someone, not for her, for himself, and Emma had been healing too. Learning that loving someone and losing them didn't make her foolish, it made her brave, that her heart could break and still beat. That some stories don't end the way you expect, and that's not always tragedy. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. There's something at the diner. Maria said you'd understand. Emma's heart stuttered. She grabbed her jacket. The diner looked the same but different. The new ovens humming, fresh paint brightening the walls, but the soul of the place unchanged. Maria stood behind the counter with a knowing smile that suggested conspiracy. "Booth 3, Mija," she said, nodding toward the corner. "Their booth." Emma walked over slowly, her pulse loud in her ears. Alexander wasn't there, but something else was. A canvas, medium-sized, leaning against the wall. And on it, painted in colors Emma recognized as her own palette, her own style but not her hand, was the diner. This booth. 2 coffee cups across from each other. One black, one with cream and sugar. Below the painting, a small envelope. Emma's hands shook as she opened it. "Dear Emma, I hired an art teacher. Turns out I'm terrible at painting, patient, dedicated, but completely without talent. This took me 4 months and approximately 37 failed attempts. The teacher finally helped me finish it, which feels appropriate. I'm learning I don't have to do everything alone. I painted our beginning, where you taught me that some things can't be bought, they have to be felt. Where I first saw you and thought you were ordinary, before I realized you were extraordinary. I don't know if you'll ever want to sit in this booth with me again. I don't know if I've earned that. But I wanted you to have this, because even if we never share coffee here again, I want you to know you changed everything. I'm not the same man who hired you. I'm not even the same man who lost you. I'm someone who's learning slowly that love isn't about control or contracts. It's about showing up, being honest, and trusting that becoming better is worth it, even when it's terrifying. The board approved my full control 3 months ago. The company is stable. My father would probably be proud, though I've stopped trying to guess. I'm building something else now, a life that matters. And whether or not you're part of it, you're the reason I know how. Thank you for cracking the door open. Thank you for not slamming it shut. Thank you for teaching me that I was worth saving, even from myself. All my love, and I finally understand what that means. Alexander P.S. I'm not here today because I didn't want you to feel ambushed. But if you ever want coffee, black or with cream and sugar, I'm at the youth center every Wednesday afternoon, teaching kids that feelings aren't weaknesses, learning it myself. Doors open, no pressure, no expectations, just possibility. Emma read it twice, 3 times, then looked up to find Maria watching with tears in her weathered eyes. That man, Maria said softly, has been coming here every Tuesday for 6 months, sits in that booth, orders 2 coffees, drinks 1, leaves the other untouched, leaves before you arrive for your shift every single week. Emma's breath caught. He's been waiting, not for you to come back, just keeping the space warm, in case you ever wanted it. Maria came around the counter, pulled Emma into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and second chances. That's not a man trying to buy forgiveness, Mija. That's a man who learned how to love. Wednesday afternoon found Emma standing outside the community youth center, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Through the window she could see him, Alexander in jeans and a worn sweater, sitting cross-legged on the floor with 6 teenagers clustered around a laptop. He was explaining something, hands moving animatedly, and one of the kids was laughing. Actually laughing at something he'd said. He looked lighter, real, like he'd finally stepped out of his own shadow. Emma pushed through the door. The bell chimed. Alexander looked up. Their eyes met across the room, and time did that impossible thing where it stopped and accelerated simultaneously. He stood slowly, carefully, like she was a dream he was afraid of dispelling. "Emma." "Hi." Her voice came out smaller than intended. "I heard Wednesdays were good for coffee." Yes." He couldn't seem to stop staring. "Yes, coffee. There's a kitchen. Or we could—" "Mr. Chen's broken," one of the teenagers announced. "He's glitching." The others laughed. Alexander's ears went red. That tell Emma had learned to love. "Give me 10 minutes?" he asked her, and the vulnerability in his voice was everything. "I'll wait," Emma said. "I'm good at that now." They sat on a bench outside the center, 2 coffees between them, black and cream with sugar. The city moved around them, buses and pedestrians, and the ordinary magic of an afternoon that felt anything but ordinary. "You painted for me," Emma said finally. "Badly. It was beautiful. It was honest." Alexander turned to face her. "I spent my whole life believing honesty was a liability. You taught me it's the only thing that matters." "I didn't teach you that. You learned it yourself." "I learned it from you." He hesitated. "Emma, I don't know what this is. I don't know if you're here because you forgive me or because you're curious or because—" "I'm here," Emma interrupted gently, "because I spent 6 months learning who I am without you. And I like who I became. I'm stronger, clearer, whole." She took a breath. "But I also learned that being whole doesn't mean being alone, and that second chances aren't weakness. They're proof that some things are worth the risk." Alexander's eyes glistened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't know if this works. I don't know if we can build something real on a foundation that started with lies, but I know I want to try." She reached for his hand, the first time she'd touched him in nearly a year. Not the version from the contract, not the performance, just us, figuring it out, slowly, honestly. His fingers closed around hers like a prayer answered. "I would like that more than anything in the world." "No promises," Emma warned, "no guarantees." "No contracts," Alexander agreed, smiling through tears. "Just trust." They sat in the spring sunshine, hands intertwined, 2 people who'd learned the hardest way that love isn't something you hire or fake or control. It's something you risk, something you earn, something you build. One honest moment at a time. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to become worthy of it, it gives you a second chance. 1 year later. The diner had become their place again. Not for show, not for cameras, just for them. Tuesday afternoons when Emma finished at the hospital and Alexander wrapped up at the youth center. 2 coffees, easy conversation, the comfortable silence of people who'd learned each other's languages. Maria brought them pancakes they hadn't ordered, like always. "You too," she said, shaking her head with a smile that held the wisdom of someone who'd watched love die and resurrect itself. "Took the long way around, but you got there." Alexander looked at Emma, really looked the way he'd learned to do, seeing not what she could provide, but who she was. "We did, didn't we? Was it worth it?" Emma asked softly. "All the pain to get here?" He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles with a tenderness that still surprised them both. "Every second. Because this is real." Outside, the city rushed past. Inside, 2 people who'd started with a lie had found their way to the most honest truth either had ever known. Love isn't perfect. It's not painless. But when it's real, when you're brave enough to earn it and humble enough to protect it, It's worth every risk, every fall, every terrifying moment of not knowing how the story ends. If this story reminded you that love can transform even the most broken hearts, that second chances are real, and that sometimes the greatest romances begin with the hardest lessons, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that prove love is always worth fighting for.